So we have found this piece of furniture, well, we bought it for $10. It's a little bit on the cheaper side because it's a chipboard with laminate and it actually has a plastic top. But it's actually solidly built and in really good condition. We're just going to repurpose it very quickly. Removed the hardware just a few minutes ago, and what I'm going to do is just clean it because there is visible splatter marks of something. I want to get this surface back down to the original surface and make sure that it is a clean and sound surface to apply the paint. So using our TSP solution, 2 capfuls into the water, I'm just going to give it a quick clean. I'm not going to sand the surface. It's actually not that shiny, so the paint will adhere to this just fine, but the top I will be ultra gripping because that is super shiny and it is a plastic, and you know, a water-based paint does have a harder time adhering to plastics. So the ultra grip, being that it's 100% acrylic resin, will hold on to that plastic surface very easily. What I like about repurposing furniture is the fact that it keeps pieces like this out of the landfill, because the next step is off to the garbage. A lot of people look at something like this and they just cannot see ahead by what you can get with just adding a coat of paint, maybe changing out the handles, doing a special faux finish. You really have so many options, and you do not have a lot invested in this piece. You know, it was $10 what it ended up costing us, and time-wise, 15 minutes to give it a good cleaning. All right, so the dresser is now clean and dry. Now, this top is a different surface than this here, and just by experience, I know that the water-based VOC-free product is not going to be adhering to this very well. So I'm going to be using the Fusion Mineral Paint Ultra Grip prior to putting the paint on. Now, you just need the thinnest layer of Ultra Grip, and because this is a 100% acrylic resin, it will really latch on to this plastic. Now, one thing I want to mention, this isn't a product that you want to shake. If you shake it, you're going to introduce a lot of bubbles, and then you're going to get like a really textured, bubbly surface. So just kind of swirl it a little bit. It's just going to mix naturally on its own here. I have the applicator, and this is really great for, you pour on some of it, but what it's going to allow you to do is just do a bit of a wash. So it will allow you to put on the thinnest coat of the Ultra Grip. The thicker the coating that you put on, you could run into some issues with it holding some texture, and you don't really want that. You only want this to be an in-between product, so it's in between this plastic top and your paint. So you just pour it on your applicator. Oops, it's a bit too much. I'm just gonna wash it on. Using some pressure. It's just, I almost feel like I'm washing windows when I do this. So I've applied a very thin coat of the Ultra Grip. While this is drying, I'm going to go ahead and start painting the front of the drawers and the side. And then either later on in a couple of hours, I'll then paint the top, or I'll just paint the top tomorrow, just to allow the Ultra Grip to really adhere to that plastic. We have our dresser that we have removed the hardware on. We've given it a really good cleaning. We put Ultra Grip on the top because it's a very difficult plastic for the water-based VOC-free paint to adhere to. And now at this point, while the Ultra Grip is drying really hard, we're going to proceed to paint the rest of the dresser. So we're going to go with the Homestead Blue because that color is going to fit in really nicely into the room that we have planned for the dresser. This is a gorgeous muted teal teal blue. And I know I'm going to get one coat coverage with this particular paint color on this surface. I'm thinking of doing a little bit of a distress. So to make that really easy, I've got this beeswax block, and what I'm going to do is just put it here and there along the surfaces which would have been naturally worn upon use. So I want to make this, it's going to be a different color, but it's also going to look like it's been worn and used. So where I typically put the beeswax is along the top and the edges, and why I'm doing that is this wax, just by rubbing it, it kind of sticks to the dresser edge here. Now that is going to be a resist. I'm going to come along with the paint, I'm going to apply it, it's going to adhere really well to the surface of the dresser, but it's not going to adhere to the wax. So after, when I go to distress it, it's going to come off very easily. So typically, along the corners, you know, when you're opening up a dresser, you're going to be using the handles. So I'm going to put some distressing here because, you know, your fingers hit it and you kind of knock the paint a bit. The top of the drawers. And funny enough, where I've put the Ultra Grip, I'm going to have to put the resist even more so there because the paint will really adhere to that. So especially along the edges. And you want to make it random. You don't want to make completely uniform distress marks. You want to make it look sense to the eye. So definitely around your handles and around the corners of the drawers, around the top parts of the drawers, not so much the bottom part of the drawer, because that wouldn't typically get a lot of use. It's where you're opening it, the edges and the top. One thing I want to mention is the fact that the Ultra Grip is clear. So now coming along and distressing, so I'm going to be removing the Homestead Blue, it's going to show this color. Had I used a white primer, for instance, on the top here, when you go to distress, you're going to see this bleach white primer, and that doesn't make any sense at all. You want to see a dark, aged wood underneath your distress marks. So now I've left a little layer of beeswax behind on all the areas where I'm going to be distressing and making it look old and worn. Now it's time to paint. Give it a shake. All the heavy parts to the paint product will go to the bottom and the lighter parts stay at the top. So to make it uniform, you definitely have to do that by shaking or stirring with a stick. Now, there's a lot of flat surface to this dresser. I think I'm going to use my Stahlmeister Oval 45 to do the top drawer and along the edges here, but I'm going to ask Jen to come along with a roller and we can do the flat parts of these drawers and the sides really quickly. Another thing is, I would normally take these drawers out and put them down so it's on a horizontal surface. I just prefer to work that way so you don't have gravity working against you. So, but just for the camera, we're going to paint the drawers in situ. So now we're back with our Homestead House Blue 4-drawer dresser. And prior to painting it, we had applied a little bit of a solid beeswax onto the areas that would naturally have been worn over time. And what that beeswax does is it doesn't allow the Homestead Blue paint to adhere to the previously brown surface. So now I'm going to take this abrasive. You can also use a sandpaper if you like. And I'm just going to go across those areas. And you'll see that I can see brown immediately. I'm not sure if you can catch that on the camera. Right here, there was quite a bit of beeswax left behind. Now, if you find, just a little bit more. I'm using far too much elbow grease than I really want to. because this is only an hour old, it hasn't really cured. Yes, it has dried, but it hasn't cured, which means that the acrylic is slowly releasing water, and as that is happening, it gets very, very, very hard. But at this point, because there's still some water droplets, if you had a microscope, you can come along with water in this sponge, and you can kind of reactivate the water that's still left in the resin here. That's what we call wet distressing. So normally you're doing dishes with something like this, but I've got it slightly damp. This is an abrasive side and this is a sponge side to hold the water. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to come along, say for instance right here, I want to do a distress mark there. Kind of wet it. You're actually weakening the paint just a little bit. So you wet it and then you turn it over to get this abrasive. And then look at that, instant distress mark. Turn it back over to your sponge side, go like that. It's like, oh, do I like that amount of brown showing through, or do I want to make it look a little bit more vigorously distressed? How about in this corner? I'm going to do it again. Wet it, abrasive side. There you go. Another little scratch, another little, it's had a bit of history here, right? This is not going to be a new looking dresser when we're done with it. Wet it, abrasive. Now I'm kind of going near where the handles are going to go back, because that's where you're coming up and opening up the drawers, so it's going to be having a little bit of, trauma, so to speak, as it's being used. And you want to kind of do it a little bit random here and there. You don't want to have a consistent, exact distress mark on every knob. It just looks so, planned out. It doesn't look natural at all. So you want to make sure that you can, step back and look at it, see how natural it looks, and then do some more. If you waited till tomorrow, for instance, it's going to be that much harder to distress this paint because it gets that much longer to set up and start curing. Although the whole process of curing can take about 30 days. If it's high humidity and say you have 2 really thick coats of paint, it could be 4 or 5 weeks. But that's, worst case scenario, you've got a real layered amount of paint there, and the elements are just not on your side, and it's been raining for 2 weeks straight, which has happened some summers. All right, what I really like is this brown popping through the blue. It looks really nice. It's a nice contrast. I think I'm going to go a little bit more vigorous on this one drawer, just because this is where we keep the chocolate. It's opened a lot. Look at that. It's right off. And I swear, you try doing that in, tomorrow, it's going to be a lot harder. But right now, totally easy. I'm not, wearing out my wrists and my shoulder and my elbows trying to remove paint. It's really not a lot of pressure at all at this point in time. Okay, remember, chocolate's in this drawer. And another thing I like about wet distressing is the fact that it looks natural. There's a lot of furniture out there where I find I can actually see sandpaper scratches. And I don't know about you, but I'm not walking over to my dresser drawer with a sandpaper in my hand to open and close it. So it just, it just doesn't look right, that's for sure. My wet distressing went rather quickly and rather well, I think. And it's a good idea to wait about 24 hours before moving on to your next step. Actually, right now I could just put the hardware on and we're good to go. It's a washable paint surface, but what I am going to do is, because it's a dark color, it can tend to show dust a little bit more than a lighter color, for instance. So I'm going to increase the sheen. There's a few ways to do that, beeswax, etc. But I'm going to use the stain and finishing oil in the natural. So this has tung oil in it and a resin as well as a couple of other oils. There's no pigment in this one. And I'm just going to apply a very light coat. And this has been shaken, but you don't really have to worry about shaking this too much because there's no pigment in there. These can openers are the best. They've got just a little bit of the curve in the metal to just lift up that lid, just so. You also have, you know, a choice. You can just do the top, for instance, and leave the rest of your unit in this matte sheen, because, I mean, usually the dust lands on top. So you're fine just to put a coat of this on the top, but I am going to coat the whole thing just to add a little bit of extra protection as well, as, you know, I want to keep it one consistent sheen. It's a very thin amount that you're going to apply. You can actually see, I'll show you when I do the front-facing drawer, that the change in sheen will actually, it almost changes the color. It's just the way the light is bouncing off. So it looks more rich. And this is really quite evident with the dead flat paints out there, such as the milk paint. As soon as you put on any kind of an oil, it totally saturates in and changes the color. So I'm going to be putting on just the thinnest coat and then removing the excess. I literally just want a paper thin amount of oil to sit on top of this paint that we've allowed a good 24 hours to cure. Just to leave behind a very thin amount of oil. See, that much is coming off. Okay, so I've removed the excess there. Oops, and look at how these areas where I've distressed through, the brown really pops now, even more so, with just a little bit of sheen. Okay, so I'm going to do the drawer front. You can really see how the color changes here. Okay, so we're going from a matte to something that definitely has a bit of a higher sheen. And that's where you're getting the color change. And this is not soaking into your paint. It's literally just sitting on top. Look at that, the distress marks are really popping there. And again, just a very thin amount. Now this will take a good 4 hours to dry, and then you're good to put your hardware on. But I still wouldn't put anything, you know, wet on it for, you know, a good 8 hours. Okay, so I've applied a little amount, and I'm just going to wipe off the excess. Okay, no drips. You don't want to leave that hanging behind. There we go. All right, so I'm just going to finish up these last 3 drawers and wait for about 4 hours and then put the hardware on it, and we're done. All right, so this is pretty awesome. We have a $15 fine beside me that has had a little bit of tweaking with Fusion Mineral Paint and a few other products. But I'm gonna do a quick little recap. So we got this at a used furniture store, $15. We gave it a bit of a cleaning with the TSP solution, dried it off, and we realized that the top was a bit of a plastic, so we put some Ultra Grip only on the top. The rest of the unit, we just applied one coat of paint, and then we came along and did a wet distress. So using a wet sponge with a bit of an abrasive, we just kind of removed a bit of the paint here and there just to show some natural wear. So as you can see, the hardware, we ended up reusing this, although you can totally customize this by, for instance, we went to Lee Valley Tools and we got some of these cool little handles. And if you wanted to, you could, totally make it your own. Like, look at how lovely that matches. You could go ahead and do an apothecary type look if you like, but this does cost quite a bit more for the handles, especially when you're buying new. So it was really great to be able to use these ones that came with the original unit. We didn't put any coating on them because they were fully a nice aged bronze metal, so we just reapplied the handles to the unit when we were done. One thing I wanted to point out was the fact that this is a dark color, the Homestead Blue, but it also dries in a very low sheen. It's a matte. So when you come along with a dark color, and for instance, you touch it like that, you can see how it's actually leaving some dry skin behind. And to alleviate that, like, you can wash that off with a damp rag. However, to alleviate that, what we did is we applied to the top and to the front the stain and finishing oil in the natural color. There's no pigment in this, but what we did is just applied one coat just to increase the sheen just that much so that you don't have this kind of effect happening. Now I'm gonna do a quick little application of it here. Wear your gloves. I don't actually wear gloves when I'm doing painting, but when you're using this particular product or the brush-on gel and finishing oil or some of the metallic waxes, I tend to use gloves. These are great little terry cloth applicators. They're also good for removing any excess oil that you may have. They come in a 2-pack, and you just want to flick off any lint if there's any on. And then just a very thin application of this oil goes on this unit. And then you wipe away the excess. See how immediately just the increase in sheen dramatically changes the color? Now that's just because of the way the light is reflecting off of it. Now it won't stay this shiny because it is wet at this point, but it will be an in-between sheen of the matte and what it is currently. Oops, a little bit here. Now you don't want to have any drips, so just double check for that, but just a really thin layer. Okay, now it will dull down just a little bit as it dries, but it's definitely going to be a higher sheen than the original matte was. There is a lot of people who like to leave the rest of the unit that matte sheen and only, put the oil on the top. But for this particular unit, we were gonna increase the sheen to the whole thing. The excess stain and finishing oil in the natural color has been removed from the side of the furniture. Fusion Mineral Paint on its own is exceptionally durable. You do not need to do this. We're just adding a coat of the oil to increase it from a matte to a semi-gloss, well, somewhere in between. So all those hills and valleys where the dust or fingerprints might get trapped in on dark colors, you're going to alleviate it by adding a coat of this. If you still want to keep the matte sheen, You just remove dust or fingerprints with a warm water rag. So yeah, there we go. From $15 to, I guess, another about $25 worth of products to finish it. And there you have a brand new unit. So our little visit to the used furniture store, we scored with this 4-drawer dresser, which we brought back, we cleaned it up, we put on less than half of a pint of our Homestead Blue in the Fuchsia Mineral paint, and it turned out awesome. We put 1 coat of the stain and finishing oil in the natural just to up the sheen ever so slightly. And now we have it staged here with our beautiful fresco wall backdrop. And actually what is a sentimental picture. It came all the way from Southeast Asia when Jenny was doing some traveling there about 9 years ago. And the wood frame I thought paired really nicely with the wood distress marks that are coming up from the dresser. And also, if you take note, these metal planting pots are also frescoed just to make them look more like a terracotta. So I hope you enjoyed our little upcycle here of the 4-drawer dresser, and I hope you picked up a few tips and you're able to incorporate it into your next fabulous find.